Sometimes in life, we have to look back in order to go forward. This morning, I want to continue on the theme that I've been sharing over the last number of weeks on facing our fears. And I want to do this today. I want to share a very famous story from the Bible. And if I was to ask any of you watching this today, Christian, or maybe you're watching and you're not a Christian, if I was to ask anyone, have they heard of this story? Chances are most people will say yes. And it's the story of David and Goliath. And you can read this great story in the book in the Old Testament called 1 Samuel chapter 17. There's 58 verses in this chapter, and I'm not going to read that now because we'll be here for quite a while. Read that in your own time if you have a Bible at home. If you're watching and you don't have a Bible, look that up on the internet. 1 Samuel chapter 17, and have a read through that and just see how powerful God was and how he was with David and the Israelites in this great story. It's a powerful story. It's also an entertaining story. And it's one that I remember way back from my Sunday school days. That's just a few years ago now. Yeah, right. Some of you are saying. But I remember many stories from my childhood. Being taught about Noah and the ark, Jonah and the whale, Moses and the burning bush, the 10 Commandments, Paul's missionary journeys. But David and Goliath just seems to be the one that stands out for me. David, this young shepherd. David, who'd never been to battle before, defeating this huge giant called Goliath. What makes this story so great? What is it? It's the story of the underdog. Everyone loves the story of the underdog winning, don't they? Unless, however, you're part of the losing side. Liverpool, my team, lost 7-2 last week against Aston Villa. Now, if you're watching and you don't like football, you've no interest in football, Liverpool losing 7-2 to Aston Villa, you will know that just doesn't sound right. Such a shock it was. I am still trying to come to terms with it a week later. One thing that cheered me up, however, was Man United lost 6-1 on the same day. So we weren't the only team defeated that day very badly. Anyway, let's get back to the message. It's not good to dwell on past hurts. Goliath was the champion fighter of the Philistines. He was what we would say today as someone you wouldn't mess with. I'm sure any of the Philistines on Goliath's side, if they get into any bother or any trouble, they would just call upon Goliath. Just wait till I get Goliath. He'll fix you. He'll sort you out. Verse 16 tells us that every morning and every evening, twice a day, for 40 days, this man-made mountain Goliath would challenge the Israelites. The NRSV Bible translation says he strutted around them to see if any of them would challenge him one-on-one. Imagine being one of the Israelites, looking out and saying, oh no, here comes Goliath again. Sure, they all had after 40 days, they all had their place where they knew to hide and get away from him. But then one day there's a big surprise. David the shepherd speaks up. I'll fight you. I'll take you on. Now, you can just imagine this, can't you? David, this shepherd boy who looked after his father Jesse's sheep and goats. And one day as he was looking after them, his father Jesse came to him and said, David, could you take this grain and this bread and some cheese down to the battlefield? Bring them a bit of grub down. Your brothers are there, and just look after them a wee bit. They're down there at the valley, facing the Philistines. David arrives at the camp. Just picture this shepherd boy walking down with all of this food in his hands. And as he arrives, the Israelites, his brothers and others, I'm sure, were all running away. They were all shouting and screaming. Because it was just at that moment, Goliath was there, challenging them for a fight. Verse 25 we read where Goliath was so arrogant, he was so confident that he offered a huge reward for anyone who could defeat him. As everyone ran away in fear, David says in verse 32, "Don't worry, I'll go and fight him." Of course, this went down like a lead balloon. King Saul told him, "David, don't be so ridiculous. You're only a wee boy. Goliath, this man's been fighting battles since he was no height. You have no chance. He'll maul you." Really, it was Saul's job to fight Goliath on behalf of all the Israelites. But he was too afraid like all the others. Yet they all had a cheek to stand and laugh at David. Big soldiers they were, weren't they? Even his own brothers were laughing at him. But David was a young man who was full of so much faith. What did he do? And I said it at the beginning. Sometimes we need to look back in order to go forward. And that's exactly what David did. Listen to this, verses 34 to 37. But David persisted. He persisted that he wanted to fight Goliath. "I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats," he said. "When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." Saul finally consented. "All right, go ahead," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." David knew something that all the others didn't. He knew all about God's faithfulness and God's power. David never forgot just how amazing the God was that he served. God who had been with him throughout many trials and different times throughout David's life. David referred back to the times that he had killed lions and bears, whenever he was taking care of his father's sheep. And he declared that the same God who rescued him from the claws of lions and bears would also rescue him from this Philistine giant, Goliath. You see, David had to look back in order to move forward. Looking back at times where God had rescued him, where God had protected him in the past. And this gave him great confidence to boldly move forward, no matter what he faced, no matter what the dangers were. He trusted God to be with him as he stepped forward with courage. You know, as fearful and as intimidating as Goliath was to all the Israelites, as frightened as they all were, David knew this enemy would be defeated because God was with him. And here's the lesson for us today. Never ever forget that our enemy and our giants that we face will tremble in the presence of God. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. Our God is higher. Our God is more powerful than any other. The enemy is already a defeated foe. The climax of this story is just brilliant. And we see God move in a mighty way through this young shepherd called David. Saul gave David his armour to put on, and David couldn't get the armour back off again quick enough. I can't fight with all this on, he says. I've never worn armour before. And I'm sure it was 4 or 5 sizes too big on him as well. And he hands Saul all his armour back. And David says, I'll just take what I need. I'll just bring what I'm good at. My sling. My sling and these 5 small stones from the river is all I need to face Goliath. And I'm sure David's brothers thought that this was the last time they would see him alive. Remember, this wasn't a battle between David and Goliath. This was a battle between Goliath's gods and the God of Israel. And we all know which one would win. David knew the power of his God, and he knew the battle was in God's hands and not his own. As Goliath approached David, David could spot one small area on Goliath's head where his helmet didn't protect. David put the stone under the end of his sling, and he did just what he was an expert at, slingshots. Remember, as a shepherd, David was trained with slingshots. This was a tactic he would use to hit animals from afar, wild animals who would be coming to try and attack the sheep. David was an expert with a slingshot. And as Goliath got closer and closer, David swung his sling as fast as he could, and he knew what time just to let it go. And the God of Israel did the rest. The stone hit Goliath bang on the forehead, right where the helmet didn't protect. And down he went in a heap, falling unconscious. Then David went over, he took Goliath's own sword that he hadn't even drawn out yet, and he finished him off, right in front of everyone. Who was laughing now? The shoe was now on the other foot. The Philistine army all ran in fear, and the Israelites ran after them. They took over their camp, they took everything, and God defeated the enemy. All because one man stood up with courage to face this giant head on. I wonder what would have happened if they just kept crying off, if they just kept running away. We need to look back in order to move forward. When we look back in our own lives, what memories do we have of God moving in our past? How many times has God rescued us when things perhaps didn't look good? How many times has God come through for us? How many times has God comforted us and strengthened us? And you know, there will be so many times in life. There will be many, many reasons in our lives that will cause us to have great fear. Our health, our jobs, our careers, our finances, our loved ones, loneliness, addictions. And even lately, COVID-19, this pandemic. One thing the enemy wants us to do is to run away in fear. He wants us to hide in the corner instead of putting our total trust and confidence in God. He wants us to back down. The enemy wants us to be fearful. Perhaps there's times we even feel sorry for ourselves and we put our head under the pillow and we just hope everything goes away. This morning, be reminded, never forget we serve a God who makes our enemy tremble with fear. I want to say that again. Never forget we serve a God who makes our enemy tremble with fear. It's not the other way around. David stood up to face the giant head on. People laughed at him. The armour didn't fit him. He'd never been to battle before. He was only a shepherd. But God used what skills and the talents and the courage that David possessed. You know, all of us are blessed with different talents and abilities that God will use. All of us can have the same courage as young David the shepherd has. But we can't run away from our giants, feeling fearful and intimidated. That's just what the enemy wants. That's the way he wants us to feel. Remember today, we serve the same powerful God that defeated Goliath. We too can look back at times in life when God was with us in the past. And God brought us through many experiences. And we can move forward with confidence and courage in the future. Whenever David's rise, giants will fall. Whenever David's rise, giants will fall. May God bless you today. Amen.